good afternoon to those on the call from the East Coast and morning for those on the West Coast. The intention today of my presentation is to review three things. One, your legal obligations on handling and disposal of mercury switch thermostats. Two, how the U.S. government makes it easy for you to store and transport these devices. And three, how TRC can make the transportation and disposal of these devices easy and nearly cost neutral. You know, very rarely have you heard that the U.S. government makes you do something that's easy, almost free and without problems. But we're going to attempt to show you a program today that is such. Mercury thermostats are regulated under state and federal law. Mercury thermostats are regulated under what they call Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA. However, in the last 10 years, what we've seen is stricter legislation that's put into place for the state-level management of mercury-bearing equipment, such as thermostats, thermometers, lights, and also batteries. Depending on what the state the project that you're working on is in, the utility program implementer may be required by both state and federal law to dispose of out-of-service mercury thermostats by either paying to dispose of them through a commercial handler or using our TRC industry-funded no-charge program. In addition, as most on the call will know, heating is the most costly building expense per square foot and directly affects the load burden that's placed on the grid. So placing these mercury thermostats in newer devices allows systems in which they control to function much more efficiently. End users are satisfied when the costs are lowered, efficiencies are optimized through energy control, and load service entities reduce the mix of generation required to meet the base load. And in addition, demand response programs facilitate the need to replace these outdated, non-programmable devices, especially when they fit the building tune-up energy management plan, and also the sustainability efforts, or overall just help to manage the load that's placed on the grid. By mercury thermostats lacking that programmability, it means that the only way to direct the load control and shave the peak demand is by replacement. Lastly, the mercury thermostats contain up to 3 grams of mercury per switch and are located in potentially any building, including commercial, industrial, agricultural, community, and households in the continental 48 states. I know it was one heck of a diatribe to start, but I wanted to get most of that out so you guys can understand sort of the background. But what is the Thermostat Recycling Corporation? You know, we are an industry stewardship program. We are funded by about 30 manufacturers, what I would call major OEMs of HVAC equipment or control. So in this case, Honeywell and White Rogers and General Electric. We were founded about 20 years ago, about roughly 10 years before any state laws were passed on the program, where it was voluntary. As you can see here, our mission is to collect those devices that contain mercury, particularly thermostats, using a reverse distribution type scheme. We've collected about 9 tons of mercury since the program was created back in 1998. So for those on the call, when you're doing a direct install for an HVAC product or demand response for thermostat, likely your company will generate mercury thermostats. You will need to do something with the proper disposal. And as you can see here, I have an example of the things that I'm looking for when there's rebates and such out in certain marketplaces, you know, whether it's a Wi-Fi thermostat or a programmable thermostat. This is really a trigger for the implementers that win the job to give us a call, because you may be seeing some portion of these devices that contain mercury in them. So as far as RCRA goes, you may know about the CFL light bulbs, but a mercury switch has, particularly a mercury thermostat, has about 1,000 times more mercury than a CFL light bulb. And it is regulated under RCRA here in the United States, which, again, was the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. To really understand your legal obligations with regards to disposing this, you have to look at 3 areas. One is RCRA, which is the federal rule regarding this. Within RCRA, there is the universal waste rule, and then there's also state-specific regulations. Without reading off my entire slide here, the name of the game is this. If you have a mercury thermostat that you are touching as the generator of that waste, whether it's a direct install program, et cetera, and it is coming out of a commercial building in the United States, you are forbidden from throwing that away in solid trash. Doesn't matter if the state has a law against it or not. Federally, you can't do that. Now, certain states will become more restrictive depending on whether or not it's coming out of household, multifamily, et cetera. That's where my slide here demonstrates the disposal bans. These are the states that just put in stricter regulation regarding disposal of these devices. In addition, there's also provision in some of these states that have HVAC contractor, which can get a little bit of a mess in terms of its definition, but these states are also states that require the contractors to recycle mercury thermostats as well. And the last little bit I would mention about some regulations is that depending on the state that you are in, if your program on the demand side management is funded by the state or ratepayers, you're also required to recycle these mercury thermostats. There's 4 states that have that as well, which I'll get into here a little bit later. For most on the call, if you're in the implementation side of utility work, you're likely probably regulated by the state level mandate on these programs, and not necessarily the federal one, unless you're doing a lot of buildings updates. So here's an example, as I mentioned, about the contractor regulation, particularly about HVAC contractors. This comes right out of the New York law that was passed last year, around July 1st, where it became active July 1st, and it was passed on December 31st of 2013. This is Title 29 of Mercury Thermostat Collection Act, Section 27-2909, Article 3.1. As it reads, any person or contractor who replaces a mercury-containing thermostat from a building shall deliver the mercury-containing thermostat to an appropriate collection site. So, buried in this particular legislation also says that you can't, it is a violation of New York's conservation law to leave it behind on the premise. So you actually have to drive it to either a collection site or potentially, depending on the state, be part of a collection program to get rid of the mercury thermostat. In New York, it's a fine up to $500 per violation per repeated offenses. So we recommend that you check your state laws regarding this, depending on the state that the project is in. We do have a chart, which I'm going to get into here momentarily, that does have a breakdown of where the disposal bans are, the HVAC contract provisions, and also the state-funded demand-side management provisions. As you can see here, I'm also using the New York law again, showing you the mandatory recycling of these devices for state-funded demand-side management projects in the New York law. I'm not going to read this off. I'll just summarize it. Basically what it's saying is when a contractor or organization receives any kind of funding or financing from the State Department/agency for installation, service, or removal of HVAC components, that contractor has to ensure that they're recycling, they're collecting, and they're transporting these devices in accordance with the law. There are 4 states that have this kind of a provision within the particular legislation. They're New York, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Again, here's the chart that I mentioned during my presentation a little bit earlier, sort of a nice breakdown of the sales ban, installation ban, disposal ban, etc. This is available via email, so at the end of my presentation I have my email address. If it interests you, please reach out to me. As you can see, most of the states listed here, it's not all 48, but it's about 13 to 14 depending on the particular legislation, and it does vary depending on the state. The takeaway message here is, again, if you are doing any kind of mercury thermostat replacement because of these demand-side management projects, and it's coming out of a building, it's not coming out of households, residential or multifamily, you have to recycle it federally. So it doesn't matter what state you're in, it has to be recycled, according to RCRA. So now I'm going on to the universal waste regulations regarding this. Back in 1998, the EPA added mercury-containing equipment to the universal waste rule. You can see I have it highlighted on this on my screen here. The types of waste in universal waste are frequently thrown in the trash by unregulated households and small businesses. So what they did in 98 was classify an item as universal waste would allow for the flexibility for proper management, and can prevent the item from entering into the trash. Instead, it will be collected and disposed of at a hazardous waste facility if you're following the law or using a collection program. For those policy nerds on the call, I guess such as myself, the mercury-containing equipment includes devices such as things that include elemental mercury in instruments through electric utilities and other industries, such as municipalities and households. It's also commonly recognized to be thermostats, barometers, manometers, pressure gauges, switches in automobiles, and also lamps. So mercury-containing equipment isn't just mercury thermostats, but it is a lot of items that do contain mercury in it. I would ask you to brush up on that if they have any questions on what may or may not be in this mercury-containing equipment section of the universal waste. Now, I'm going to get into my next slide here, which is what RCRA did most recently the last few years. They lessened this universal waste rule on the collection program, which means ultimately that for those on the call, you could actually store hazardous waste on these job sites without needing an EPA number to do so. You don't need a manifest, and you don't need personnel training to do that, assuming you have you're using a type of a collection program that we run. I would ask, if you have any questions about this, to ask your health and safety people, like which classification you are. What I've circled here is what they call conditionally exempt small quantity generator, which most of the call should fall underneath, but again, I would ask your health and safety folks to verify where you fall in this. And again, as a reminder, 3 or 4 grams per device of a mercury thermostat of elemental mercury is what would be there. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this chart here. Kind of all starts with what the on-site accumulation is. I don't believe most would be accumulating over 1,000 kilograms of elemental mercury. That's a lot of waste. So it's not very intrusive for you to collect on site. So I'm hoping that my presentation hasn't scared anyone away from pursuing to doing the right thing here, because this is where TRC and our program really comes in. We are an approved collection program for this. We're listed on EPA's website, as you can see here. I circled that. It's easy to comply with the disposal. It is a free program that's been put in place by those manufacturers to assist you when you collect these devices. So here's a quick snapshot of how the program works. 1, mercury thermostats, they're removed out of service. So this is when you're doing your direct install work because of demand-side projects. Secondly, the thermostats then will be brought either to the closest collection point, or they can be stored in TRC's container on job site, as I mentioned with the universal waste regulation that was lessened over the years. Our program uses a prepaid FedEx label with a liner and this sturdy recycling container that you see on the right-hand side of the slide. The mercury thermostats would go inside of the container there, and you would ship it back to us using the prepaid label, so the entire container goes to us. When the bin is full or also in 1 year's time of accumulation, it's sent to our processing facility in Golden Valley, Minnesota, where the industry is paying to get rid of these devices on your behalf. And after processing these devices, then the empty bin will be sent to you to do it all over again, all prepaid for you with no charge. So here's the offer. For those on the call that are implementers, the regulation requires you to do this depending on where the unit is coming out of. You can't leave it behind, and the generator of the waste is responsible in commercial buildings. In other states, it varies. So again, if you're doing multifamily, you have to look at your state law to figure out whether or not you have to safely dispose of these things. Secondly, this offer that we have today is a very high cost-to-benefit ratio for you. It's a free container. It also includes unlimited shipping. There are no costs incurred, yet the benefits to you are high because you can use it as a value differentiator against your competition, particularly when you're using it as an RFP quoting mechanism when you're trying to win a job that has direct install of these devices. For the utilities on the call, regulation in certain states still may require you to recycle it, especially if you're in the business of installing some of these yourself. So it really goes back to the generator of the waste. Whoever is touching that device, it would be the one in charge of it, depending on what state you're in. We also ask utilities on this call to help us. This kind of information should be on your RFP. We do have language and text available asking the implementers to make sure that they're recycling these devices. And we would also ask those utilities on the call to status check the safety policies of the implementers that they are hiring to do this work. So, again, if you're pulling mercury thermostat yourself, doesn't matter if you're a utility or an implementer, you should order one of our free bins today. If you're contractors, if you have contractors doing the direct install, require them to contact us, and then also make sure you're checking in on their safety procedures. So, mercury thermostats, they do have the largest reservoir of mercury in products that remain in households today. Some cases, commercial buildings, and quite frankly, they shouldn't go in the trash. We want you to participate in this program, support product stewardship, and these extended producer responsibility issues. Thank you to AESP for the opportunity today to participate. please feel free to email and call me. And with that, are there any questions?